You've heard the name. You've seen it in documentaries. But what really happened inside the B-17 Flying Fortress is a story few can forget. This isn't just a story about a bomber plane. It's about the young men inside, their fear, pain, and the brutal reality of war at 20,000 feet. The B-17 was called the Flying Fortress for a reason. It was loaded with machine guns, up to 13 on later models, sticking out from almost every part of the plane, from the nose to the tail. Even underneath in a spinning turret, the gunners had every angle covered. American generals believed that with enough guns and tight formations, the B-17 could defend itself, even in daylight missions. So, instead of sneaking in at night like the British, the Americans flew in full view of the enemy. But what looked strong on paper turned into a nightmare in the air. Each B-17 carried 10 crewmen: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, flight engineer, and 5 gunners. They were packed into a narrow metal tube, freezing cold, loud, and filled with the constant roar of engines and gunfire. The most dangerous spot? The ball turret. It hung underneath the plane like a glass bubble. The gunner had to curl up inside, knees tight to his chest. And the worst part? He couldn't wear a parachute in there. No room. If the plane got hit and the turret jammed, he was stuck. If the plane spun or broke apart, he had seconds to escape. If he could at all. That wasn't rare. Nearly half of all B-17 crewmen were killed, wounded, or captured. Let's talk about one of the craziest stories from the skies. In 1943, a B-17 named All-American was hit by a German fighter. The enemy plane slammed into its tail, nearly cutting it off completely. Most of the tail was just hanging by a few strips of metal. The tail gunner, still back there, alive. Barely. From another bomber, a crewman snapped a photo of the All-American midair, its tail hanging on by a thread. Somehow, the autopilot was still working, using electric wires instead of the broken cables. With help from the rest of the formation, the plane managed to return. Landed. No major injuries. Yes, that really happened. But most stories didn't end that well. If having your plane sliced in half sounds terrifying, imagine falling out of one without a parachute. That's what happened to Alan Magee, a 20-year-old ball turret gunner. His B-17 was hit over France. He tried to get out of the turret, made it into the fuselage. But when he grabbed for his parachute, it was shredded by flak. Then another explosion hit. It blew him right out of the plane. He fell 4 miles through the sky. He should have died, but instead, he crashed through the glass roof of a train station. Somehow, it slowed his fall just enough. The Germans found him alive, with broken bones, shrapnel wounds, but breathing. They were so shocked. They treated him immediately. Magee lived to be 84 years old. Alan wasn't the only one. Eugene Moran, another tail gunner, also fell from the sky. His bomber took a direct hit. The tail was blown clean off while he was still inside it. It spun through the air, thousands of feet down. His parachute? Useless. It had been shredded too. So he did the only thing he could. He stopped fighting. He accepted death and waited. But death never came. The tail slammed into a tall pine tree, breaking the fall just enough. Moran survived. Barely. With a crushed skull and severe wounds, he was saved by a Serbian POW doctor inside a German camp. Against all odds, he lived to see the war end. For most bomber crews, it wasn't German fighters that terrified them the most. It was the flak. German anti-aircraft guns weren't firing blindly. They were connected to radar, calculators, and fire control teams. These systems could predict exactly where the bombers would fly and place explosions right in their path. B-17 crews would look ahead and see the sky erupt with black clouds. Not smoke, not fireworks, but steel shells exploding midair, throwing razor-sharp shrapnel in every direction. One direct hit could rip a plane apart. A near miss could kill a man. Even a single shard of flak could slice through aluminum, cables, fuel lines, or flesh. And the worst part? Bombers had to fly straight through it. No swerving, no dodging, because the bombardier needed a stable flight path to aim. So the crew sat there, helpless, hoping they wouldn't be the ones to get hit. Watching other planes explode next to them, hoping to see parachutes. Usually, they didn't. If you thought surviving a hit was hard, wait until landing. Even when a B-17 survived a mission, the job wasn't over. Sometimes, the horror was just beginning. Planes limped home with engines on fire. Holes the size of doors ripped in their sides, entire sections missing, control cables snapped, oxygen systems broken, but somehow they stayed in the air. Like the time Lieutenant Delancey's bomber got hit in the face, literally. A flak shell tore off the entire nose of the aircraft. The bombardier was killed instantly. Delancey found himself flying at 20,000 feet in what felt like a convertible. No windshield, no instruments, and air cold enough to freeze skin in seconds. No compass, no oxygen, no maps. The navigator had to guess the way home. The crew braced for death, but Delancey didn't give up. He dove the plane low enough so the crew could breathe, dodged enemy guns for miles, and somehow, with no brakes or flaps, the plane landed. If things went bad and a crew needed to jump, that didn't mean they were safe, not even close. First, they had to reach an escape hatch. Not easy in a spinning, burning plane. Then, they had to crawl through while wearing heavy flight suits and gear. Many didn't make it. Some were knocked out by the impact. Some were trapped by fire or jammed doors. Even when they did get out, the danger wasn't over. Some parachutes had been damaged by flak. Others didn't open at all, and if you landed in enemy territory, you might get captured if you were lucky. And yet, some survived the most insane falls of all. Let's go back to the tale again. James Leedy was in a B-17 named Skippy when his plane collided with another during a cloudy mission. He had no idea what happened, only that the tail was spinning fast and that he was falling. He didn't even realize he was in a separate part of the plane. After a long fall, the tail slammed into trees, slowing it just enough. Leedy crawled out, expecting to find the rest of his crew. They weren't there. He was completely alone. He was later rescued by Greek Orthodox monks. You might be asking, why did they keep flying these missions? Why keep putting young men into metal boxes that often didn't come back? The answer is simple. It was the only way the US had to strike deep inside Germany. The bombing campaign was brutal, but the goal was to destroy factories, railways, and supply lines, to break the enemy from the inside. And slowly, it worked. But the cost was damning. Out of every 100 men who flew bombing missions over Europe, 50 were killed. Another 27 were captured or wounded. Only about 25 out of every 100 made it through the war in one piece. The B-17 was called a fortress, but many crewmen had a different name for it. Despite all the stories of survival, the crews weren't fooled. They knew what the B-17 really was. Not just a fortress, but a flying coffin. Inside it was cold, loud, cramped. Most men froze in sub-zero temperatures. Their oxygen masks would sometimes freeze to their faces. Frostbite was common, and every mission felt like a gamble. They had to watch their friends die in front of them, sometimes in a fire, sometimes falling from the sky. They had to keep flying anyway. The B-17 is one of the most famous planes in history. It flew more than 290,000 missions, dropped over 640,000 tons of bombs, and helped bring an end to one of the darkest chapters in human history. But the real story isn't just about the plane. It's about the crewmen, boys barely out of high school, strapped into aluminum shells, flying through flak, fire, and fear. They saw things no one should ever see, and did things no one should ever have to do. So the next time you see a B-17 in a museum, look closer. Behind the metal and the machine guns, they were real people who lived, died, and somehow survived the darkest skies of World War II.